Hello! Today I'm finally going to be talking about a book that I have teased a little bit when I talked about Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur when I did the first installment of Can Week for this year. There are more to come when I feel like doing it. But that book, of course, is Girl in the Woods by Aspen Mattis. Firstly, before I continue talking about this book, I'm going to give a huge content warning, a huge trigger warning for discussions of sexualized violence, assault, rape, not only just specifically for the content of this book, but that will be mentioned throughout this video, as well as discussing certain issues surrounding that. As the book states directly on the front of it, as part of Aspen's synopsis, it is about Aspen when she is known as Debbie, how she grew up, before she became Aspen Mattis. On her second night of college, she is raped, and it goes from describing that, having given some context of her family life before, describes and goes through her reaction to it, the reaction of her university administration, as well as the reactions of her parents, and how she is dealing with it and coping with it for the rest of the year until around the end of the year. She decided that part of her healing process needed to be her doing the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a massive fucking trail that goes from Mexico to Canada. So that's the basic structure of the book, I guess, the basic outline of what the memoir is. But for me, I really read this as, in part, a narrative of shame. And this comes through the current situation in dealing with being a survivor of sexualized violence and assault, as well as things from her childhood. So as she is on the emotional and physical journey of being on the trail, of walking this, she also weaves things from what she's currently dealing with in her current situation of walking the trail, as well as stuff from her past and stuff that was happening at university and college. And I think that that was expertly done. I really do. The way that the story is told is very, very good. Even though I have a lot of marginalia in this book, because it is like really viscerally important to me, there are three specific things that I tabbed off that that's kind of how I want to unpack it a little bit more in terms of what I want to talk about before I talk about all the other stuff that I want to talk about. Firstly, in terms of shame, like I mentioned, one aspect of shame that she talks about is the shame of living through the male gaze and the shame of internalized sexual objectification in terms of being confined by how men think of you and perceive you, and how this leads you to view yourself in the most fucked up ways imaginable. And this was so powerful to me. Why am I crying? I haven't talked about this a lot on the channel because I didn't really realize it actually until I read this book, but it helped me to be able to confront the fact that I'm not a sex positive person. I am actually a deeply sex negative person. I have just deep rooted negative, awful associations with sex, with sexuality, all that kind of stuff. And this book helped me see that and confront that. And it's always just like a cathartic and I guess healing experience to read something that so graphically explains the way that you feel. The second thing that I want to talk about in this book is about self-care and what this book taught me about self-care. Because this year, obviously, like, I know about self-care. I knew about it as a concept. It's obviously something that's talked a lot about in terms of like activist work, about how exhausting and taxing it can be, and you know, taking care of yourself, especially when you have mental health problems, all this kind of stuff. But I don't think I really got a sense of what it actually means to care for yourself. So part of this is kind of linked to the first thing in terms of the way that you grew up, kind of internalizing degraded views of yourself. It's hard to see yourself as being lovable or worthy of love. but part of self-care is recognizing that you are worthy of being loved by yourself. And that's like difficult to go through. But part of the conversation that Aspen has, or what she talks about when she gets to this point in her journey, is she realizes that there are just like the small things that she could be doing for herself, right? Drinking more water, putting sunscreen on, just like those little things that make you feel better. And I feel like I was doing stuff like that, and I knew what it meant to like care for yourself in that way. But what this book really helped like click for me is the fact that self-care is so much about setting boundaries for yourself, and that looks different for different people. So for her on her journey, it was her setting boundaries with men. And the third thing that I want to talk about is her relationship with her parents. So she has a very particular relationship with both of her parents, and I have never just openly cried and sobbed at a nonfiction book, a memoir, like, except for this one, because of the way that it describes her relationship with one of her parents, and the way that she like learns to forgive her parents. I think I saw it on one of the write-ups for the book, but someone described this book basically as being an opened wound. This book is the rawest. It is very honest. That rawness and honesty means that there are these amazing cathartic visceral moments of like connecting with those parts of what she's going through, at least for me personally. But it also means that you're gonna get the stuff that is off-putting, and I don't mean off-putting in terms of like the way that she's dealing or what she's going through emotionally, but just the stuff where you're like, why'd you say that? Or like, why'd you need to say it that way? Like, when you have that rawness and that openness, you're going to get both sides of the spectrum. You're going to get the ugly parts of it and the beautiful parts of it. Something that I appreciated about this book that just goes along with it being like raw and honest and open is that she's very upfront about her privilege. So she is upper class, and that's not something that she tries to mask or downplay at all. That's how it came off to me anyway. Like, I remember reading Not That Kind of Girl by Lena Dunham when she was very masked and guarded the privileges that she was experiencing, if that makes sense. I don't know if anyone else kind of got that feeling when you were reading it, but she just wasn't upfront with being like, look, I grew up this way, I experienced all these other things as well, which is what that happened in this memoir. And that obviously bad, awful, terrible things happen to people of all different places in life, right? That's the point, intersections. A point that I want to stress about this book is that I feel that if you are not in a similar position to her, where you feel like you can identify with at least some, maybe most of the aspects of what she's discussing through her own emotional and physical journey, I can totally see how you wouldn't like this book, or you wouldn't like connect to it. Like, I feel like it's one of those books that you do need to read within a certain position, socially probably, as well as emotionally, in terms of dealing with specific issues around this. Like, I can definitely understand why other people wouldn't connect to it as much and wouldn't enjoy it as much. And going off of that, another interesting conversation that I had with Jason Bay is about how I also feel that Wild by Cheryl Strayed, I hope I got that correct, I think that's actually kind of the same in a sense. I feel like my understanding of the book, again, I haven't read it because it doesn't appeal to me, is that she is, I understand she's like middle-aged, dealing with a lot of this stuff, going through it. She has her journey with her specific set of like social location, as well as her own emotional journey as well. And I feel like a lot of, because they are kind of similar, right, in that way, that I feel like depending on your positionality, you'd enjoy one or the other more, is kind of what I'm theorizing. I could be wrong, but you know what I mean? Also another interesting part of that conversation we had is wondering, because Cheryl Strayed Wild was such a like breakout success, that it'd be interesting to know if that hadn't happened, if there would be the same kind of space for Girl in the Woods. Another really interesting aspect of this memoir is that it is a women's voice in a traditionally male-dominated narrative of wilderness, solitude, finding yourself in nature, danger, adventure narratives. And it's so interesting that way because, firstly, as she discusses all the time in the book, the trail is male dominated. There are very few women who do that trail. However, there are two things that I could find where I actually think she borrows from the traditional male dominated narrative and implements into her own narrative in a way. The first one has to do with the way that white people discuss the land. I would have appreciated if at some point, even though it's not like the main focus of the story or whatever, some point if she unpacked her location where she was. Because there is one moment where she discusses that she's walking through a desert with which a lot of people from Mexico try to get over into the US border. And I believe there's one other part where she notes that she sees a sign or something describing the fact that she is in a specific Indigenous or Native American people's traditional lands or their homelands. And so it just, obviously I would have liked to have seen a more complex discussion of her position on the actual physical trail and what that meant. But along with the way that we talk about the land, the one that really I found very frustrating was the way that she would continuously describe parts of the trail, parts of the wilderness she was experiencing as being virgin. Discussing land through the lens of virginity is not new. That is some very old bullshit. And it was so weird in the book too, because part of her journey is, one of the things that she does is she it's hard to explain and I don't want to not do it justice, which is why I'd encourage you to read the book if you think you would connect with it and find it interesting. But part of her journey is that she goes through a section where she feels the need to describe herself as being a virgin because that's what she wished were true. And that's something that she would use to try and deflect any kind of potential gaze of her being like a sexual, being a slut, you know, all this kind of stuff that was thrown at her on the trail. And so she would use virginity as a defense to that, to clamp it down. So simultaneously, as she's discussing her own process going through that, which I obviously like respect, and I have no problem with that, she would then describe the land as like being virgin. The way that it read to me, it didn't seem like a conscious link that she was making between her body and the land. Like, to me, that's not how it read, that was being done intentionally. And so that's why I like found it frustrating, because like, why do you need to do that? The other thing that drove me fucking crazy was her continual use of the language of the tribe. She would constantly refer to groups of things like her family, the people she was meeting on the trail. She would just constantly use the language of the tribe. So inappropriate, and like, I don't understand why that was okay. It's not. I don't understand why anyone else thought that was okay. And there is moments where she actually brings in, I think she tried to tie it in terms of discussing, like, she'll bring in parts of like anthropology and how that's like an area of study that she finds interesting. And then there was also, she like alludes to this thing in her childhood where she used to like draw people's, like, she'd basically create her own creation stories. I really hated it. The last thing that I want to talk about is the ending of the book. I don't want the ending to have changed because that's her story. It's her memoir. It ended the way it needed to for her, and that's all that this book should be. Because I guess this is kind of a little bit of a spoiler alert, but she ends up meeting a guy on the trail, and they end up like together and like getting married and everything. And it's not like she like met a guy and then it like changed her whole life, and it didn't like fall into the weird fucking heteronormative romance bullshit. Like, it was that she went through this whole journey of learning things, discovering things about herself, and then she met this person, and you know, so that obviously that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I ache for is a narrative like this that discusses so many of the same things that I've been dealing with, all that kind of stuff, that doesn't end in being with another person in like a romantic sexual sense, because like I need to know that that's possible. So if you have any suggestions of things that you may have read that's like that, let me know. So that was Girl in the Woods by Aspen Mattis. As you can probably tell, it was a very viscerally emotional read for me, but I also understand why other people wouldn't connect to it like at all. I also totally get that, and that's fine. Everyone has different experiences with books. So that is it for now, and I will see you in the next video.